Rain hammered the windshield as Emma gripped the wheel and counted her breaths. The street lamps smeared into gold ribbons, and she felt the night watching. Emma said, "I just need answers," and the wipers answered in metronome snaps. She parked by the old clinic, where Lucas claimed he worked late, and the silence felt rehearsed. A door creaked, and Lucas stepped out with a small metal case clutched to his chest. Emma said, "Why lie about overtime?" and her voice thinned like steam. He froze, then smiled too slowly, the smile that never reached his eyes. The case slipped, and the lid popped, revealing photographs sealed in plastic. Emma said, "Who are they?" and thunder swallowed the last word. A siren wailed somewhere distant, then died. Lucas said, "Go home. This is not for you," and he kicked the case shut with a brittle clack. A shadow moved behind him in the doorway, and fear drew a line down Emma's spine. She knew the night had chosen a side. Morning slid into the kitchen like an apology no one believed. Emma watched the kettle hiss and counted the seconds, hoping numbers could cage dread. She replayed the metal case opening and felt the cold rise again. Emma said, "He knew I was there," and she set 2 cups on the counter out of habit. The second cup accused her with its white shine. The house felt curated by someone else, every framed smile a staged alibi. Her phone buzzed with a message from Noah asking if she slept. Emma said, "I did not," and turned the screen face down. She opened the pantry and found a missing jar, a small nothing that felt like a pattern. The back door clicked, a sound she knew too well. Lucas said, "Early start," and kissed the air near her cheek. The kettle screamed, and she turned it off, letting the silence decide who spoke next. She chose quiet, and felt it tighten like thread. The clinic's lobby smelled of bleach and secrets. Emma traced a finger along the Signup clipboard and found last night's late entries. She imagined the pen scratching lies into neat letters. The receptionist smiled with teeth that never met her eyes. Emma said, "I'm here for Lucas," and the name felt like glass on her tongue. The receptionist stalled and shuffled forms, then suggested he was off rotation. A printer coughed in the back like a nervous witness. Emma asked for records, framed it as concern, and met a polite wall. She stepped into the hall and saw a maintenance door locked with a fresh padlock. The metal looked too new for this tired building. Emma said, "Show me what you protect," to the door, and listened for an answer. Only the air vent spoke, humming a steady denial. She snapped a photo of the lock and felt the first thread of a larger net. Noah met her on the cafe patio where the street noise softened into rumor. He slid a napkin across the table as if it were a shield. Noah said, "Tell me everything," and his voice carried a careful calm. She described the case, the photos, and the shadow in the doorway. He flinched at the word photos and masked it with a sip. Emma said, "You asked if I slept," and she tried to smile. He warned her to move slow and keep copies of everything. A bus sighed at the curb and left a trail of heat. She showed him the lock photo, and thoughts tightened behind his eyes. Noah said, "This is bigger than an affair," and folded the napkin twice. The cafe music skipped, repeating a single note, and the loop made the air feel thin. Emma pocketed the napkin like a contract she had not read. At dusk, she returned to the clinic alone and counted 5 steps from the drainpipe to the locked door. The rain had paused, leaving the air heavy and listening. Emma said, "If nothing is here, prove it," and tried the handle. A faint hum pressed through the wood, rhythmic and cold. She pressed her ear to the panel and heard metal clink, then silence. A motion sensor clicked somewhere above, and the corridor light rose. Emma stood still and let the light find her. Footsteps approached from the far stairwell, unhurried and certain. Lucas said, "You should not be here," and his shadow cut the hall in two. She stepped back, and the hum quickened like a pulse. Emma said, "What are you hiding?" and the light flickered once, as if it knew. He smiled without warmth, and the lock shone like a coin on a grave. Emma sat in the living room, where the morning sun fought through heavy curtains. The clock ticked louder than her pulse, each second another reminder of silence. She stared at the family photo on the mantel and felt its lies. Lucas appeared in the doorway and asked if she had plans. Emma said, "I might visit my mother," though her voice bent with hesitation. He nodded quickly, too quickly, and left his coffee untouched. The chair he used to read in felt vacant, like it had forgotten his shape. She whispered into the empty air, "I do not know who you are anymore." Her words sank into the carpet like stains. The air thickened with unspoken tension, making even the lamp hum seem hostile. She turned the photo face down, hiding the smiles that no longer matched. The house groaned as if it knew the weight of her choice. Emma parked outside Margaret's old townhouse, where vines curled around chipped brick. Her mother opened the door with a wary half-smile that failed to meet her eyes. Margaret said, "You should not come unannounced," though her voice betrayed a tremor. Emma stepped inside and smelled lavender mixed with dust. The walls carried photos, yet gaps marked spaces where memories had been erased. Emma asked, "Why did you never tell me everything?" And she gestured to the empty frames. Margaret deflected with tea, but her hands trembled, pouring water. A single photograph of Emma as a child remained, tucked in a silver frame, untouched by time. Emma said, "I saw Lucas last night, and he was not alone," and the silence that followed was a verdict. Margaret's eyes darted away, searching corners for words that never arrived. Emma drove to the park where she once read stories to Noah under oak trees. He was waiting on a bench, phone in hand, eyes tracing the ground. Noah said, "You look tired," and his words carried more pity than comfort. She sat beside him, clutching the lock photo, its edges damp from sweat. Emma said, "This is not just betrayal. It is something buried," and she handed him the image. Noah frowned, tracing the padlock on the screen, his jaw tightening. He warned her about following shadows too far, but curiosity pulled her deeper. Emma said, "I need the truth, no matter how it breaks me." He placed a hand on hers, steady but uncertain. The park children laughed in the distance, their joy discordant against her storm. The bench creaked as if it too bore the weight of secrets. At home again, Emma opened the drawer where Lucas kept bills, expecting order but finding chaos. Receipts from late-night diners, cash withdrawals, and notes written in hurried scrawl filled the space. She spread them across the table like evidence. Emma said, "Every paper is another lie," and she pressed her palm against her chest. She found an invoice from the clinic signed by a name she did not recognize. Lucas entered, caught the mess, and froze. His eyes darted to the invoice, then to her, as if measuring whether to fight or flee. Emma said, "Tell me who signed this," and her tone cracked but stayed firm. He replied with a shrug, pretending it was unimportant. The ceiling fan whirred above, each blade slicing silence into sharper edges. She folded the invoice carefully, like something alive. The night pressed against Emma's bedroom window, heavy with unanswered questions. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her reflection in the dark glass. Emma said, "If I cannot trust him, then I must trust myself," and the words barely carried. A faint sound came from the hall, a footstep too deliberate. She held her breath, gripping the invoice like a talisman. Lucas' shadow paused outside the door before moving away. Emma whispered, "Secrets breathe louder than truth," and the room answered with silence. She lay back on the mattress, but sleep refused her. Every creak of the house became a confession. The clock ticked toward midnight, each second a verdict she was not ready to face. She knew the next step would demand more than fear. Dawn scraped a thin line of light across the study as Emma unlocked Lucas' laptop with a code he once bragged she would never guess. The screen bloomed with folders that wore harmless names and dangerous dates. Emma said, "Show me where you bleed truth," and opened a directory marked staffing. Emails stacked like bricks in a hidden wall, each thread looping back to the clinic's night shifts. A name kept repeating beside Lucas's, and it was not Margaret's. Emma said, "Who is Adrian Cole?" and clicked attachments that loaded too slowly for her pulse. Spreadsheets mapped hours against unlisted rooms, and notes referenced deliveries with anonymized initials. Her stomach tightened as she traced a route from the service door to the locked hall. The chair creaked, and fear pretended to be the sound. She copied everything to a drive shaped like a key. Emma said, "If I cannot stop this, I can at least know it," and the sun finally found her face. She met Noah at the archive room of his office, where fluorescence flattened every secret and made them look ordinary. Boxes labeled audits lined the walls like quiet jurors. Noah said, "Tell me the pattern," and she laid out the printouts, edges aligned like a case file. He traced the entries with a pen and found overlaps that should not exist. Emma said, "Adrian links every late hour to that locked corridor," and she watched his eyes narrow with reluctant belief. He warned her that proof without context could cut both ways. Emma said, "Then we find context," and slid the drive across the table. The hum of the lights made the air feel thin, and the clock stubbed forward with a tired tick. Noah said, "If this is trafficking of something worse than pills, you cannot go alone." She held his gaze and nodded once. Fear shifted into a steadier shape. Lucas arrived home early, and surprise landed between them like a dropped glass. He found the empty space where his laptop had been, and the faint impression of papers on the desk. Lucas said, "Looking for ghosts again," and his voice reached for humor and missed. Emma stood in the doorway and held the invoice like a blade that could not cut yet. She said, "Who is Adrian Cole?" and watched his pupils tighten. He tried to turn the question into a shrug, but his shoulders betrayed him. Emma said, "You are not lying to protect me," and her tone carried the weight of dawn. He stepped closer, and the room shrank to the space between breaths. Lucas said, "Some doors keep you alive," and the words sounded borrowed. She tasted metal in her mouth and stepped back. The house listened like a witness that could not testify. Emma drove to Margaret's townhouse with a question that would not sit still. The hallway smelled of polish and winter apples, a scent older than comfort. Margaret opened the door with eyes that had already heard the knock. Emma said, "What did you make Lucas promise?" and the floor tilted in the silence. Margaret moved to the window and pressed 2 fingers to the glass. She said, "I asked him to keep you from a past that kills," and her voice searched for steadiness. Emma asked who Adrian was, and a name gathered at the edge of Margaret's mouth, then retreated. Emma said, "If this is family, then it is mine too," and the room seemed to lose a degree of warmth. Margaret's hands trembled as she reached for a drawer and stopped. A clock chimed noon with a mournful patience. The truth waited behind something brittle. Evening thickened as Emma parked behind the clinic and counted cameras like constellations guiding her worst idea. She followed the service path and listened for the hum she had memorized. The corridor light wavered, then steadied, like a heartbeat finding purpose. Emma said, "I am here for answers, not mercy," and slid a slim pry bar from her coat. The fresh padlock stared back with a bright, cruel eye. Footsteps multiplied at the stairwell, too many for chance. Noah whispered from the shadows that he would stall if needed. Emma said, "Only if I call," and fit the metal to the lock. The sound was small but treacherous, a whisper that knew its own danger. A door above opened, and Lucas's voice came down like cold rain. Emma held still and felt the decision take shape in her bones. The lock yielded, and the corridor breathed. The lock surrendered with a crack, and the door exhaled stale air that carried dust and antiseptic. Emma pushed it open and found rows of metal cabinets lining the narrow room. Folders thick with sealed reports bore her family's name. Emma said, "You kept this from me," and her fingers trembled as she reached for one marked "Read." A photograph slid out, showing her as a child in a clinic bed, wires taped to her arms. Her throat closed, and the air shrank around her. Noah whispered, "They studied you," and his voice was ragged with disbelief. Emma staggered back, heart hammering against the walls of her ribs. Each cabinet carried names she recognized, neighbors, distant relatives, friends. She felt the betrayal stretch into something generational, older than lies she had counted. Emma said, "This is not just Lucas. It is all of them," and she dropped the file. The silence pressed like stone. Her phone buzzed, slicing the silence. The screen showed Margaret's number, glowing like an omen. Emma answered, voice shaking. "Why are my childhood records in this clinic?" The pause on the line stretched until Margaret said, "Because you were never meant to know." Emma pressed her back to the cold cabinet as Noah steadied her shoulder. Margaret's voice cracked, confessing she signed Emma into trials, meant to cure an inherited illness. Emma said, "You chose lies over truth," and her tone trembled, but did not break. Margaret admitted Lucas was ordered to guard the secret, not just from Emma but from anyone who asked. The words throbbed like an old wound reopening. Emma closed her eyes, feeling her childhood rewritten in one breath. She whispered, "You betrayed me before I could even speak," and the line went dead. The room pulsed with grief that had nowhere to rest. Emma stumbled into the night air outside the clinic, chest aching like it carried years she had not lived. She leaned against the wall and tried to breathe. "Noah said, they used you," his words breaking like glass underfoot. She showed him the child photo, her face too familiar under hospital lights. The wind lifted the paper edges, mocking the fragility of truth. Emma said, "Every moment I thought was mine belonged to them," and her voice cracked open. Cars passed on the distant road, indifferent to her unraveling. Noah said, "You do not need to face this alone," but Emma's silence answered differently. She folded the photo and slid it into her pocket, keeping proof close to skin. The night hummed with a cruel stillness, and the street lamp buzzed overhead. Emma whispered, "They built my life on experiments," and felt the ground tilt beneath her. Emma confronted Lucas in the kitchen, where the hum of the refrigerator filled every pause. She dropped the child photo on the counter, and the paper curled under the light. Emma said, "You guarded lies older than us," and her words struck sharp. Lucas froze, jaw tight, eyes locked on the photo as if it burned him. He said, "I was told it would save you," and the admission trembled. Emma replied, "You saved nothing but their silence," and the air thickened between them. He reached for the photo, but she slapped his hand away. The room grew heavier, walls closer, ceiling lower. Lucas whispered, "I loved you enough to protect you from the truth," but the words rang hollow. Emma's shoulders squared, and her eyes no longer carried the softness he knew. She said, "Love that lies is not love," and the night cracked open in the quiet. Emma returned to Margaret's townhouse, storm gathering above, air charged with thunder waiting. She burst through the door and found Margaret seated at her piano, fingers resting on keys that never played. Emma said, "You sold me before I could choose," and her words struck like lightning. Margaret's eyes filled, but her lips pressed shut, a barricade against confession. Emma slammed the folder onto the piano, and the keys groaned under the weight. She demanded names, dates, reasons, but Margaret only shook her head. Emma said, "You chose science over family," and the silence screamed louder than denial. The storm outside cracked, echoing her fury. Margaret whispered, "I thought I was saving you," but her voice broke into fragments. Emma stared at her mother and felt the bond fray like an unraveling thread. The room held two women, bound by blood and broken by betrayal. Emma stood in the clinic corridor, storm clouds pressing through the windows, every step echoing like judgment. Lucas blocked the door ahead, his stance wide, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. Emma said, "You chose their lies over me," her voice cracking yet sharp. Lucas' hand trembled, not from fear but from holding back truths. He said, "I did everything to protect you," though his words sounded rehearsed. Emma stepped closer, holding the file like a weapon of paper and ink. She whispered, "You protected the secret, not me," and her chest heaved with years of buried pain. He lowered his gaze, unable to meet her stare. The hum of machinery beyond the door deepened, like a pulse waiting to break free. Emma said, "If I walk through, I will never return the same," and silence weighed like stone. The door stood between them, a threshold carved from betrayal. The argument erupted with no room for restraint. Emma slammed the file on the metal counter, and pages scattered like confessions. she said. Every page proves you chose them before me. Lucas' voice sharpened. I saved you from knowing what would destroy you. His tone carried both rage and grief. Emma stepped forward, her finger pointed like a blade. She said, You destroyed me by pretending. His fists clenched at his sides, veins visible, jaw locked. The room shrank until only their breaths filled the air, jagged and raw. A folder landed at Lucas's feet, its photograph spilling out, Emma in hospital lights as a child. Lucas bent, picked it up, and closed his eyes. He whispered, I never forgave myself for signing it, but the words came too late. Emma's voice steadied with steel. I will not forgive you either. The confrontation reached its breaking point. Lucas cornered her near the cold metal cabinets, his words low and desperate. He said, They made me choose between silence and losing you forever. Emma's eyes burned with tears that refused to fall. She said, You already lost me the moment you agreed. His face tightened, torn between guilt and rage. He pounded his fist against the cabinet, the sound cracking like thunder in the confined room. Emma flinched but stood firm, refusing to retreat. She lifted the old photograph, her voice steady. This is the proof of my stolen childhood. Lucas' hand trembled as if to snatch it back, but he stopped mid-air. The silence afterward cut deeper than any blow. Emma's breath came heavy, her chest rising with both defiance and despair. The cabinet seemed to lean closer, pressing the weight of truth onto them both. Noah burst into the room, breathless, his presence slicing through the tension. He shouted, Enough! This ends before it kills you both. Emma turned, startled, her hands still gripping the photograph. Lucas glared at Noah with a mixture of rage and shame. Noah, said Emma, deserves truth, not a cage built of silence. Lucas's voice broke. You do not understand what was at stake. Noah stepped closer, his jaw set. I understand betrayal when I see it. Emma said, Stop fighting for me, I can fight for myself, her tone sharp with finality. The storm outside rattled the windows, lightning tearing across the sky. The three stood in triangle tension, each tethered to pain that pulled in opposite directions. Emma's voice cut through. I will not be anyone's secret anymore. The room fell into charged silence, broken only by thunder's growl. Emma stood face to face with Lucas, every barrier between them torn down. She said, You thought you could bury me under lies, but I will rise above them. Her voice was steady, sharper than the storm outside. Lucas lowered his head, shame casting shadows across his face. He whispered, I never wanted you to carry this weight, but the words had no strength left. Emma lifted the files high, evidence glowing in fluorescent light. She said, These lies are yours, not mine, and I refuse to carry them anymore. She dropped the stack, papers exploding across the floor like broken chains. Lucas reached out, but his hand hung empty. Emma turned, her footsteps steady, the sound echoing louder than thunder. She walked out into the storm, the rain baptizing her resolve. The past was shattered, but her strength was unbroken. The storm had passed, leaving the town soaked in silence. Emma sat at her kitchen table, the papers she carried now dried but warped with rain. She traced her finger across the edges as if they could rewrite themselves. Emma whispered, I have carried their shadows long enough. The house groaned with quiet, every sound unfamiliar. She looked at the chair where Lucas once read, now empty, its absence louder than his presence. The photo frames on the wall stared back with false smiles. Emma said, I cannot destroy the past, but I can stop it from owning me. Her breath steadied, the rhythm new and fragile. She pushed the papers aside and let the quiet settle. The air smelled of damp earth, seeping through the cracks of the old house, as if the storm had moved inside. She closed her eyes and accepted the weight of stillness. Later, Emma walked through the park where the grass still shimmered with rain. Noah waited on the bench, his hands clasped as though holding back words. Emma sat beside him, her gaze fixed on the wet ground. Noah said, You look lighter, though broken. She replied, I am not lighter, I am simply heavier in truth. He He offered her coffee from a paper cup, steam curling into the cool air. Emma held it but did not drink. She said, "I will not run from it anymore." The laughter of children carried faintly, their joy cut through the stillness. "Noah," said, "you have a choice now, not chains." Emma's lips curved in something close to gratitude. The bench creaked as though it too had been waiting for her decision. She stared at the horizon where the storm clouds retreated, the light uncertain but real. Emma returned to Margaret's townhouse, this time without rage, only resolve. Margaret opened the door with eyes swollen from sleepless nights. Emma stepped inside. The smell of lavender faded and replaced by dust. She set the folder on the table, but did not push it toward her mother. Emma said, "You cannot undo what you chose, but I will not let it define me." Margaret's lips trembled, words caught in her throat. Emma continued, "I am not asking why anymore. I am telling you it ends here." The silence stretched until Margaret whispered, "I was afraid of losing you." Emma replied softly, "You lost me the day you stopped trusting me." Their eyes locked, the distance unbridgeable, but acknowledged. Emma turned to leave, her shoulders straight, her steps steady. Margaret remained seated, hands shaking, staring at the closed folder she could not touch. Emma walked along the shoreline at dusk, the ocean restless but calmer than the storm inside her. She carried no papers, no proof, only herself. The horizon bled orange into gray, the sun sinking as if in retreat. Emma said, "The sea holds secrets too, but it never lies about its depth." Waves lapped at her boots, tugging but not pulling her down. She inhaled salt air, letting it cleanse what words never could. A gull cried overhead, sharp and lonely. She whispered, "I am not free, but I am no longer caged." The sound of her voice faded into wind, carried beyond her reach. She closed her eyes and let the waves kiss her ankles, grounding her to the present. The ocean did not answer, yet its silence felt like understanding. Night settled as Emma returned home, the house quieter than ever. She lit a single candle on the table, its flame trembling against the darkness. Emma said, "I will live with what they buried, but I will not live in their shadow." She gathered the photo frames and stacked them in a drawer, hiding smiles that no longer belonged to her story. The candlelight flickered across her face, carving lines of strength where once was only grief. She whispered, "The truth is heavier than lies, but it does not suffocate me anymore." The old house creaked as though listening, its timbers carrying her words into memory. She leaned back in the chair, closed her eyes, and exhaled. The quiet pressed in, but this time it did not crush. It simply was. Emma sat by her bedroom window. The candle burned low, its wax pooling like time wasted. The phone lay in her palm, the screen black yet heavy with silence. She whispered, "I could call someone, but who would answer?" The night outside was still, the storm gone but its scars etched into the air. She thought of Lucas, of Margaret, of Noah, and how every thread was now frayed. Emma said, "I was never theirs to keep," and pressed the phone against her chest. The quiet held her like a fragile truce, uneasy but unbroken. The next morning, Emma walked through town, her steps slow, every storefront a reminder of how secrets hid in plain sight. People passed her with polite nods, unaware of the truths folded inside her chest. She said softly, "The world keeps moving, even when mine stops." She caught her reflection in a shop window, her face pale but steadier than before. A child tugged at her mother's hand nearby, laughter spilling free, and Emma almost smiled. She whispered, "I will not let their lies shape my tomorrow," and continued down the street. At the cafe, Emma sat alone, the cup of coffee untouched, steam fading as quickly as trust. The chair across from her remained empty, and she traced circles on the table with her fingertip. She said, "I used to believe in shared mornings." The barista called out orders, voices blending into meaningless background hum. Emma's eyes lingered on the empty chair until she pulled her gaze away. She whispered, "I do not need them to sit with me anymore," and lifted the cup, sipping bitterness that tasted almost like strength. Evening fell as Emma stood on the old bridge, the river moving dark and restless beneath her. She leaned against the rail, the cool metal grounding her thoughts. She said, "Everything they buried flows back eventually." Cars hummed faintly in the distance, but here only the water spoke. She dropped one photograph into the current, watching it drift and spin until it sank. Her chest loosened, breath steadier than it had been in years. She whispered, "This is where the lies end," and the river carried the proof away. Night closed in. Emma returned home to silence, her footsteps echoing on wooden floors. She placed her phone on the table and stared at it, waiting for it to ring. Minutes stretched into absence, and no call came. Emma said, "I have been alone all along," and the truth no longer broke her. She blew out the candle, darkness folding around her, but she felt the quiet differently now. It was not safety, nor threat, but simply hers. Emma sat in the dark, her heartbeat steady, and whispered, "The secret is no longer mine to carry." The silence answered with peace.